Okay, everyone, I think we're ready to start now. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming to this session on fertility myths. I think it's a really important subject because there's never been more information around about fertility, and there's never been so much information around that is complete nonsense, actually. So I hope that this afternoon we'll manage to make some things slightly clearer and manage to talk about some of those myths as well. My name's Kate Bryan. I work for the charity Infertility Network UK as the London representative. I also edit the Journal of Fertility Counselling, and I'm a journalist, and I've written a few books about fertility as well. So I've been working in this kind of area for a very long time, and most importantly of all, I think my qualification for talking about any of this is the fact that I had IVF myself, and my two children were both IVF babies. So I'm going to start by introducing the panel, and they're each going to actually introduce themselves, in fact, because I think that's the best way to do it. So we're going to start with Jodie Day.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks so much for coming along. My name's Jodie Day, and I'm the founder of Gateway Women. And Gateway Women is a friendship and support network which is now global, amazingly, for women who are childless not by choice, often childless by circumstance. We hear a lot about sort of infertility, about people not being able to conceive, or the idea of choosing not to have children, which is child-free. But about 80% of those women who are childless not by choice are actually childless because they didn't meet a partner, or their partner already had children, or they were with someone during their fertile years who didn't want children, or many, many reasons sort of which are circumstantial other than choice or medical infertility. That's a really, really growing number of people. So in a way, Gateway Women includes those who can't have children for medical reasons, as well as those who can't have them for all of the other reasons. We're also child-free friendly too, although the experience of being child-free is a different one to not being able to have children when you wanted them. So my own story is that I did want to be a mum, and I tried for many years to have children when I was married, and struggled with something called unexplained infertility, which is actually what a third of women and couples who have infertility struggle with, which is basically, we don't know what's wrong. Everything seems to be fine, but it's not working. In fact, when I had an operation to check to see if everything was okay, because I had an abortion when I was 20, and so I was scared that there'd been some physical damage, which there wasn't. The gynecologist said as I came round, absolutely first-class property, finest uterus I've seen this week, ready to move into. You young people go off and have lots of sex. So that was very encouraging, but unfortunately it still didn't work. So I realised I got divorced when I was 38. I think my infertility was a factor in it, but also there were other problems in the relationship to do with my husband's addiction problems, sadly. And then I thought I'd meet someone else and do IVF. That was what I thought, do IVF. Had no idea that it was actually such a high failure rate. I thought it was a silver bullet that was always going to get me out of trouble if it got to that. But actually I didn't meet a partner to try IVF with in time. And so I was 43 and a half and a couple of post-divorce relationships under my belt when I realised I was definitely never going to be a mum. And it was a really shocking realisation. And although that was the cognitive moment, I knew, it emotionally took quite a few more years to come to terms with not being a mother and to grieve all of the collateral losses, never having children's birthday parties, never having the first day at school, never being the mother of my partner's children, never giving my family grandchildren. Sort of there were so many experiences as an adult and as a woman that I felt shut out from. And I also watched my friendship group fall apart as well, as over a period of 20 years, all of my friends became mothers and I didn't. And we just lived very different lives. So it was a very lonely experience for me, and I started writing a blog called Gateway Women 4 years ago. I got my first piece of PR the day after I wrote my first blog, which was extraordinary. And I had women from all over the world writing back to me and saying, how can you know what's inside my head? These are the exact words that are going around my mind. I thought it was just me. And I still get shivers down my back, because that was the moment when I realised also that I wasn't alone. And that even though my friends and family and society seemed to think that my reaction to not being a mother was melodramatic or self-indulgent or a bit over the top, or really, you're so lucky you don't have kids, or why don't you just adopt, as if sort of, they were available at Tesco's. It was, I realised there were a lot of women all over the world who were struggling also with coming to terms with a life they didn't choose and not quite sure what to do with it. So fast forward 4 years, I've written a best-selling book. I have a copy here, but it's not for sale, but you can get it on Amazon. And Gateway Women's become a global friendship and support network. There's a whole row of my wonderful members here today, beaming back at me. And I feel very honoured to have been chosen by accident, in a way, to be the leader of a new social movement. And I'm now a founder in social innovation, a member in social innovation at Cambridge Judge Business School. And I think I'll stop there because there's lots more I could say, and hopefully some questions from the floor later. But I'm so grateful to see you here, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Jodie. Next we're going to move on to Afia Yasmin.
Hello. So I'm Afia Yasmin, and professionally I am a consultant at University College London Hospital. I have subspecialized in 2 disciplines within gynecology, and one is subfertility. I like the term, or I prefer to use the term subfertility instead of infertility, because that's the more appropriate one, actually, because it's not an absolute condition, infertility. And I also specialize in a condition called diverse sex development. So I look after young women. Usually I meet them at adolescence. Say, for example, who are born without a womb, or born with no ovaries, or what we'd called premature ovarian failure. There's no such thing as no ovaries or gonads at all. So these are the 2 worlds kind of I inhabit most of the time. I will leave some of the more scientific bits to later for your questions. And on a personal level, what I want to say first is I'm quite passionate about destigmatizing fertility, subfertility, and assisted conception. I meet with clients time and again who express to me that they find it very difficult, the whole process quite stressful, and especially when they have to juggle a career and fertility treatment, because they feel that they cannot confide in a colleague or their managers. And this is, to me, it's quite strange. I understand where it comes from, but this is a societal issue where a woman doesn't feel that she can actually divulge the condition she's going through. So if there was, say, a fracture, you wouldn't have, or having an operation like a removal of gallbladder, there wouldn't be such a hesitancy about divulging or saying, I'm going to the doctors for this condition. And the other thing I would like to say is I would like to see that a woman's or an individual's, be it man or woman's, choice is respected at any time. Choice to have a baby or not to have a baby, choice to have a baby when they feel it's right as well. And on a very personal level, I and my husband, we made a philosophical decision to remain child-free.
Thanks, Sophia. That was really a very good point, I think, about the stigma of fertility problems, which I think is something that we all understand very well. Carmel, I think it probably makes sense for you to follow on from that. It's Carmel Dennehy.
That's because Afia Yasmin and I work together at UCLH. I'm a counsellor and psychotherapist there. I also work at Bart's Fertility Unit, and I also work at another private clinic called CRGH. I've been within obstetrics and gynecology for 15 years, so I've followed women through the very difficult part, trying to get pregnant, being pregnant, staying pregnant in the postnatal period. I'm very passionate about this work. I've been setting up counselling services at various different hospitals over the years, and I'm glad that there's more of an openness to engage with counselling at that very difficult and challenging time. You want to come on to points afterwards?
Yeah, we'll talk
okay,
about points
then I'll just leave it. I won't say any more at this point. I'll be good.
Next we'll go to Harjit Saran.
Hi there. 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with unexplained infertility. And so I started doing the IVF too. And we spent about 2 years doing absolutely everything that we could find, that we could think of, that we could afford, to try and create a family. And in 2007, my first son was born. We had 4 embryos from the IVF, and my first son was born by emergency cesarean. And he was born with heart defects, so we had what we thought was a really difficult period. It was even worse for us that year. It was a very difficult year to deal with, taking my son through open heart surgery when he was just 6 months old. He's fine now, he's 8 years old and pretty supercharged, I would say. And when he was 2 years old, we received an invoice from the clinic charging us for the 2 embryos that we had frozen. And if I be absolutely honest with myself, I didn't want to have another child because of the very negative experience that I'd had with the first child, and I was just terrified that I wouldn't be able to cope if the same thing happened again. But after much thought and consideration, we did decide to implant another 2 embryos. And 2 weeks later, I suffered an ectopic pregnancy. And at that time, my feelings were a mix of anger towards myself for making a decision that went against my gut feeling, which was to not have that second child. And then also immense relief that part of our life was over. We could close the door on fertility and just get on with parenting Ruben, my firstborn. When we got home 2 days following my operation, contrary to what the doctors had told us, we found out that I was actually still pregnant with one of the embryos that was implanted. And 9 months later, I had my second son, Ayrton, who was born with no health issues. So you can imagine at that time I felt, and I do feel now, incredibly grateful and lucky. And at that point I decided that I wanted to do something, I guess, more meaningful with my life, something with intention, something with purpose. And so I gave up my life as a divorce lawyer because I didn't tick any of those boxes. And I set up my own fertility practice, and I started doing a campaign for same-sex marriage for same-sex couples. So what I do is I assist infertile couples who want to consider alternative means, for example, donor conception and surrogacy. I, with pride, help lesbian couples who want to conceive using known donors, anonymous donors. They may co-parent, they may choose not to. And of course, gay couples who go through surrogacy arrangements. For me as a lawyer, what I find very frustrating is that the law is very outdated. And so even though there are all of these different ways to conceive, excuse me, all of these different ways to create families, the law really doesn't protect either the surrogate or the intended parents in co-parenting situations. Again, the law really needs to play catch up. So what you find is that a lot of people take risks by having their own arrangements outside of the law, or they go to countries where, for example, commercial surrogacy is perfectly legal and much more accessible, and they take a different kind of risk. So I would like to see the law catch up with alternative families and support the different ways in which one can create a family. I was incredibly proud a few weeks ago when I read the Mary Portas story that she went public about her brother, using her brother as the donor. And I think that we need to hear more stories like that. I think we all talk about infertility from a heterosexual point of view, and we sort of have an understanding about that. But I think there needs to be a lot more exposure and dialogue about what it is for gay and lesbian couples who, most of whom think that they have to make a choice between settling with their same-sex partner and having a family. They think they can't have it all, and they can't have both, but they can. So there's a lot of catching up to do. I'd like to see a lot more exposure and positive stories like Mary Portas' story. So that's my story.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much. That's really interesting. Now, last but not least, Jessica Hepburn.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just want to say it's so inspirational hearing all these stories, and I want to apologise to the women that I'm on the panel with, because I thought the format was slightly different of the session today. And so all morning I've been preparing a little 10-minute talk. And partly because I hate public speaking, I have to do a lot of preparation. And then Kate said, no, we're just going to get you each to introduce yourselves and then we'll go into questions. So I've been panicking, so I apologise to my panellists. But then when you hear them talking about their experiences and what they do, it's amazing. So I'm going to introduce myself by reading you the first 2 paragraphs of my talk, if that's okay, because it will say who I am. Yesterday, I was invited to a secondary school in West London to talk to 350 girls as part of their International Women's Day celebrations. At the start of the assembly, the headmistress read out my biog, saying that I had been chief executive of the Lyric Theatre Hammersmith for the last 9 years and listed all the theatre boards that I sit on, all correct. She even said that I was a paragon of someone who had succeeded in what had traditionally been a man's world. Thank you. But what she didn't mention, even though she told me she Googled me, so I knew she knew, was that I had also written a book called The Pursuit of Motherhood, which came out last year, and is about my decade-long struggle to have my own biological child. It's involved 11 rounds of unsuccessful IVF, multiple miscarriages, and a life-threatening ectopic pregnancy. And just for the record, it hasn't yet resulted in a baby. Nor did she mention that since writing that book, I've become a trustee of Infertility Network UK and a columnist for the Fertility Road magazine, writing about the patient perspective. And why would she mention any of this? Because it's not the sort of thing you want young girls to think about. Against the backdrop of my professional success, it's all a bit disappointing and perhaps a bit distasteful that I have talked about it so publicly. I know, because I'm disappointed and find it a bit distasteful, which is why I was so secretive about it for so many years. My family didn't know the depths of despair and desperation that I went to in my struggle to conceive, let alone my colleagues at work. But you know, sometimes you've just got to be brave and say the things that need to be said. So I did, which is why I'm here today as well.
Thank you, Jessica. I could actually listen to you go on for hours, quite frankly. But we will start talking now about fertility myths. And what I've asked everyone to do on the panel is just think about what, for them, are some of the biggest fertility myths. For me, working for Infertility Network UK, one of the things that I see every single day of the week, practically, is people who haven't really understood what IVF can and can't do. And we see so many people who think that it doesn't matter if you leave it a while because there's always IVF. The reality is there isn't always IVF, because IVF is not actually a treatment for age-related fertility problems. It's a solution to many fertility problems, but it can't turn back the biological clock. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that, which then leads to a lot of heartbreak. And the other thing we see at Infertility Network UK, when people are having treatment when they're older and it doesn't work, is that kind of thing, well, why isn't it working? There must be something else, there must be some other reason. But often it is just age, and that's a terrible, terrible thing for everyone to have to admit when we're all women and we all feel young and fit at 40 and 50 and 60. But you know, our ovaries aren't still young and fit at 40 and 50, and that is the sad truth. The other thing I think we don't often realise is how high the miscarriage rate is as we get older. Once we get into our early 40s, you're more likely to lose a baby once you're pregnant than you are to keep that baby. And by the time you get to 45, the miscarriage rate is 93%, which is absolutely shocking figure that I think people are often not aware of. So for me, I think working for a charity where we're supporting people, that is my biggest fertility myth. Is that one that you'd agree with? I mean, what do you think yours is?
Definitely, I'd agree with everything that you said. However, in medicine, with biology, nothing is black and white. So whilst it is true that with age fertility will decline, but I would like to quote some statistics at this point. Actually, it is quite difficult to get pregnant, and with the kind of population boom and a problem that we have, it doesn't ring very true, but it is. So for someone in their 30s, early 30s or just 30, she will take about, also 80% of 30-year-olds will conceive in a year of trying. Only 50% will conceive in 6 months of trying. For someone, for 35-year-olds, this percentage comes down to 60%, and for 40-year-olds, it'll be 40%. So that is what we are dealing with. So although that it is very true that it's going to be more and more difficult, but it is not impossible. So I think people need to understand that, but at the same time not take it for granted. And it cannot be an assumption. I think I was having a little chat with Manjit earlier that just because of having puberty at the right time and having periods doesn't mean one is fertile. And same for men. We seem to forget, and whenever we associate subfertility and women together and not forget about the men. And in a heterosexual partnership, 40%, when you look at the breakdown of causes, 40% is due to a male factor, 40% due to a female factor, and in 20%, as you said, it remains sort of incompletely explained. It could be a bit of that, maybe a bit of endometriosis, slightly slow-moving sperm, not something not very definite. So, yeah, that's what we deal with. And it is a global issue. Fertility is not something that just comes from having made some lifestyle choices and delaying conception. It is a global issue. And the WHO report from 2012 states that in the developing world, 1 in 4 couples will have delays in conception or some problem with fertility.
I think that's really true, and I think the point that you mentioned about fertility treatment not being, I think sometimes we think because it only works, we know each cycle only works 25% of the time, we think that 75% of people who try it won't get pregnant. But in fact, if fertility treatment was funded according to the NICE guidance and people were getting 3 cycles, the success rates are actually, cumulative success rates are sort of 60-70% over those 3 cycles.
Correct. That's correct. It is age-related. It is age-related, but yes, with 3 cycles, provided there is again there are some ifs and buts. Provided there is enough sperm and there are enough eggs, yes, then we will get those percentages.
Carmel, do you see that in the clinic, people not always realising that IVF's maybe not quite as successful as they think?
Because I work in fertility clinics, I think people have copped on by the time they've come to see me. So they're feeling really despondent and quite sad and quite frustrated with themselves, particularly if they've been in a relationship for a very long time and they haven't opted to start a family earlier. I think from their perspective, I think what they find difficult is a little bit of a cliche. A lot of people then in response to that say, relax and it'll happen. Oh, you look young, it'll happen. And it doesn't work like that. And we do know that people the other thing is that women are under terrible pressure while they're having IVF. Somehow the media and society thinks you're going to sit cross-legged and be stress-free in the Himalayas doing I mean, IVF is up there with a life crisis, like a divorce, like a diagnosis of cancer, and it's a very stressful time. So to try and go through treatment and not be stressed is just impossible. So I think people have to factor that in as well, the pressure from them. And people have got pregnant in very stressed situations.
Do you think that's something that is one of those big myths for you, that people need to be de-stressed in order for it to work?
They do. A lot of women are stressed about being stressed. It's counterproductive. And a lot of partners think, I need to stay calm so you're not stressed so the treatment will work. And it really doesn't make any difference. It's a very difficult time. It's almost impossible to bypass it and not be stressed during that time.
Jessica, I have to ask you to speak about this now. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's really interesting. As a consultant, I think what struck me by the 2 things that you said is that part of the problem with this is that there are so many unknowns. So there is an unknown, there's this thing about your fertility wanes when you get older, which is true, but you can still get pregnant in your 40s. In fact, I met a woman last year who had 3 natural children, all over the age of 40, all biological children, none of them were twins. And so it does happen. And then equally, the whole thing about stress, well, on the one hand, I had a consultant say to me that there was a study done of women who had been raped, and the incidence of them getting pregnant, obviously in a very, very stressful situation, was, no different from women, who were getting pregnant in a consensual, loving relationship. However, having said so I totally agree that stress, there is no clinical evidence at the moment, really, that stress has an impact. And yet, I still feel there is a massive mind-body link around subfertility. I really agree, it's not infertility, it's subfertility that we don't know about. And we'll probably not know about in all our lifetimes, but I believe it's there. And so it's the unknowns that are difficult, I think.
Jodie, what's your biggest fertility myth?
I think I was really shocked when I first kind of found out that I was sort of too old to do IVF, really. And I remember writing an article and getting some rather aggressive comments from a woman, which is quite common for stuff that I write, about, you're all intelligent women, you should have known this. You can't really be upset now, a bunch of career women, you should have done it, 20 years ago or something. Not knowing anything about my story, of course, but, don't let the facts get in the way. It took me a long time. I really thought about it. I thought, why didn't I know more? I'm a really well-informed woman, and why didn't I understand more about my own fertility? And then it came to me, the reason I didn't research it more was because I thought I knew. I didn't know that the information I had was wrong. So that, I'd picked it up over the years from other women, from the media, from articles, but it was incomplete. And that was what I was basing a lot of really important life decisions on. So, I think there is still a great, which is why I'm so passionate about, doing things like this, where we actually get to talk openly about the real information from people who actually know it. But probably for me, the biggest fertility myth that I've lived through, and that is really kind of what my life is about now, is the idea that you cannot get over childlessness, that there is no way to recover from unchosen childlessness, that your life is going to be a disaster, that you're never going to be okay, you're never going to be happy, your life is never going to have meaning again. It's going, basically, you are destroyed as a woman. And I think when I first, was facing my life as a childless woman, I couldn't find anything out there that countered that message. There were no books, there were no websites, there were just lots of websites for women trying to conceive, and some really rather aggressive and frightening websites about being child-free from the US that do not match my experience of the child-free people I know, but were very aggressively anti-parents and anti-children and really quite scary. And I thought, gosh, is that what people are going to think I'm like? But there was nothing about my experience. And as I've moved through my grief and have come through it and have been transformed by it and help other women to do the same, one of the things we really need is role models. Not just role models who stand up and sit on a platform and write books, but just women we know, talking openly about the fact that they're childless, they didn't choose it, and now they found a way through it and they're doing this with their life, or they're not quite through it yet, rather like destigmatizing, having fertility treatments. I think the experience of not becoming a mother needs to be normalized. 1 in 5 women are turning 45 without having had children. 90% of those didn't choose it. This is double what it was a generation ago. And I think for those born in the 1970s, it's going to be 1 in 4. We're too big a minority to be shamed.
Roger, what from...
I think for me it was that IVF would work. As soon as we had our diagnosis, we thought, that's okay, we'll just go to a clinic and have IVF, and obviously it took a long time. But I just want to say that for me, when I was growing up, I had sisters, a family full of females, and my mother completed her 4-child family by the time she was 25. I never ever thought that it would be an issue. And I think that it's something that needs to be taught at schools, because we concentrate on our careers and we think for as long as we have periods, we're okay, we're fertile. But it comes as a big sledgehammer when you're told that you're not, and it could be too late.
I think the idea that periods equal fertility is one of the biggest myths.
Yeah. And then also that pineapple juice does not help implantation. I hated the
We
day.
could spend hours and hours going through the maddest things that everyone's heard about this.
Don't do it.
Do you encounter actually in your work, Effie, a lot of very odd ideas about what people think might help and might not help, that actually you can say to them, no, this really is nonsense?
Being a woman of science, the thing is, I never discount anything. So my principle is, if something makes you feel better, do it. However, what I'm against is an industry taking advantage of vulnerable women or couples, or men for that matter. And of course, where I come from is I need the evidence, and I want to convey the evidence to the clients. And this is what works and this is what doesn't. There is a thing called placebo. It's very well known. Irrespective, even if you took a glass of water, it can, and you did a study with it, you might get some evidence that it could work. So there is this placebo effect. What we have to look at is whether this piece of evidence can be reproduced. So yes, I do get questions about various supplements, whether this is good. If it's not going to do any harm, yes. What we have to realize is, if you're having a healthy diet, it's not rocket science. It's just eating and drinking healthy, the right amount of carbohydrates, fats, and protein. And therefore, when you do that, you absorb the right amount of vitamins. There are few supplements that are necessary. And keeping healthy actually has an advantage of making or placing you in the best possible health in order to carry a pregnancy. It actually does not improve fertility as such. So yes, people ask about acupuncture. Now, again, there is a role of acupuncture in pain management, and that has been proven. There is no specific pathway that we can actually explain of how it can induce ovulation or make new eggs, because as we stand now, if we have a situation of age-related infertility, because what happens, what is this age-related infertility? There are two factors. One, because women are born with a fixed number of eggs that will decline every day, every cycle. And because these eggs have been formed right inside the womb, there will be chromosomal deficiencies throughout. And this is why it is difficult to conceive, or if there is a conception, there are more miscarriages. So unless with the help of stem cells we can create eggs, at this point there is nothing that can be done to make new eggs. And I think that is important, because I get this question time and again, is there anything I can take to improve it?
I think that's a really common thing, that people want to do something themselves to help. Carmel, is that something that you find when you're seeing people, that they just want to find something that's going to make the difference?
I sometimes slap the consultants across the hand, not Effie, but just to say, just leave the women alone, leave them to their own devices, because sometimes in the uncertainty they feel they're doing something, and if they're feeling acupuncture is helping them to relax, or reflexology or something, let them do it. Again, as Effie said, just so long as they're not exploited. And I think women get that. They have a sense of the practitioner. They need that additional relationship for support at a difficult time.
Jodie, I know that's something you've spoken about before, about the amount that you spent on these things.
Yes, I think I tried, just really, it got to a point where I could have just walked around London sort of randomly stuffing £50 notes through people's doors. I think, I sort of peed on every kind of stick, gave up certain foods, ate certain foods. My fridge looked like a pharmacy. I force-fed my husband vitamins. I took cough mixture. I stood on my head after sex. I had my feet rubbed, my head rubbed, my eyes looked into, you name it. And some of it was really quite nice. But none of it got me pregnant.
Jessica, what about you?
Oh yeah, I've done them all too. And I've also spent a huge amount of money on IVF, and have a huge amount of debt that me and my partner will be paying back for years to come, which so whatever you spend on all the sort of alternative treatments, there's the escalating costs of IVF, and I think it's really difficult because I'm often asked, do you think you were exploited? And again, it's just such a difficult thing. I think every doctor we went to see, they weren't just taking us our money, they desperately wanted to give us a baby, and we desperately wanted to give them our money to give us a baby. And there is something really, really unhealthy in that situation, particularly against a backdrop, which it's just absolutely shocking that fertility treatment, the inequality of fertility treatment on the NHS in this country. I mean, let's decide whether we think it should be on the NHS or not, rather than have this sort of unequal system around the country, so that most couples are being forced to go into private treatment. And as I say, even though I think doctors do want to give couples babies, I do think that we do not have all the information that we need to necessarily make the right decisions. And in our case, and this is just my hunch, we have unexplained infertility as well, and my hunch is that IVF, which was invented for a very specific condition, was for women with blocked fallopian tubes, as you said, Kate, and is now a ubiquitous treatment. I don't think, if we could find out what was wrong with us, and I don't know that we will, I don't think IVF is the solution. I think if we could find out what was wrong with us and fix that, we probably never needed IVF, because we make perfect embryos, and I can't seem to carry them to term. So I want to see more research around this, and it just really depresses me that the NHS are not treating people equally or pushing this forward.
Effie, I wanted to ask you, how do you make those decisions when someone comes to you and says, I want treatment, and you think, well, this is really not very likely to work? Is it very difficult to convey that to a patient?
Yes, it is difficult, but at the same time, there are two issues. So as an NHS consultant, I have to work with what is available. That means there are certain criteria set for treatment. I don't know if you're referring to that. So there is a pot of money, and that pot of money is available if a same-sex couple or heterosexual couple fulfill certain criteria of age, body weight, having children from previous relationships or not, and also, very importantly, what is called the ovarian reserve. That means, is IVF likely to work? Is there a chance of working? And is this money well spent? That is where it comes from. And yes, this is all that I have to convey to the couple. And it is a very difficult decision to say IVF is not for you or ICSI is not for you, but sometimes we have to make those decisions. And sometimes it's clear cut. For example, if there's no sperm, there's a condition called azoospermia, and if we are not able to surgically retrieve sperm either, and for the couple, donated sperm is not an option, of course that's the end of the road, apart from, of course, adoption. And so there are certain absolutes, but there are certain issues which, even the clinician will not understand. The science is still looking at a lot of aspects of fertility, because remember, I initially alluded to this, that conception is actually a miracle. Half of the chromosomes, protein, come from the dad. It's foreign protein. Whenever the body is exposed to anything foreign, its response is to reject it. The question that everybody's been trying to answer, that the scientists have been trying to answer all these years, is why is a pregnancy not rejected every time? That is the question. It's not that it is rejected and miscarriages happen and conceptions do not occur. It's actually the prime thing is why is a pregnancy actually, why does it continue and not rejected?
think that's a really interesting point, because actually once you start knowing a bit more about fertility, and I'm sure this is something that Jessica and Jodie will both say as well, you realise actually how amazing it is that anyone ever gets pregnant, and you start thinking, how on earth does it ever happen?
Which makes me quite cross at the sex education I had at school,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
was, very much don't even sort of sit on a warm chair if the boy's been in it.
I think that's really true. I mean, when you look at a class of 30 children, the chances of one of them having a teenage pregnancy are probably quite slim, and yet 5 of those children will go on to have fertility problems, but we don't mention that at all because we're so worried that they might all get pregnant if we do, which is an interesting one, I think.
In a way, that was why this redundant talk that I do, what I went on to say started with this school, because I looked at those girls and I thought I was them 30 years ago. And nothing's changed, We are told that we've got to do well at school, we've got to go to university, we've got to be picky about the partners we find, we've got to get a job and climb up the ladder. And this is still going on with the young women that I employ now in their 20s. They're going through exactly the same thing, and they have got an added thing, which a lot of them are still living at home because they haven't got the financial independence to leave, and I do feel whilst I feel there's a real conundrum here, because I don't want to suggest for a moment that women can't get pregnant in their 30s, 40s, or even 50. Women can become mothers at any age. I met a woman last month who had her first baby at 56 years old. She's incredible. It was with egg donation, but and she's totally honest about that. So you can become a mother at any age. But for me, one of the big fertility myths is the most healthy time, the best time to get pregnant, the best time to go through IVF if you've got subfertility is in your 20s. Why have we got a society where that isn't possible, isn't really possible or encouraged? And that's not to say that being a parent older isn't good, because in many ways it is, but we need to have this open discussion, because it's just looking out at those 350 girls yesterday. They're not having it now either, and exactly as you say, Kate, they might not be teenage pregnancies, but more of them will be going through what we've been through, and that's why these talks are so important.
Carmel, do you find that with women that you see that they have sort of felt a real need to succeed in other areas of their life before they come to this?
The question almost makes me a little bit angry, because I think with infertility or subfertility, which is a better word, it's almost like people portray that people that have subfertility have wanted to be career women. They wanted to do this, do that, do the other, and it's their own fault now they can't have children. The language that's used around these women are desperate, these couples are desperate, manic, anxious, neurotic, and what's happening and being filtered in on a cellular level to these women. So I don't see that. I see women coming to IVF that have had a really difficult journey. A loved one has died, a parent has died, a mother has had cancer. They haven't met the right man. So it's for all these organic, really, really sad reasons. So I say, if I say anything here today, stop all of that crap. Stop it. Don't allow it.
Carmel, I remember being interviewed on the radio in Ireland a couple of years ago. Some TV radio presenter, and I don't think he really knew who I was. There was a sort of shuffling of notes, and then he said, so you're one of those career women then? And I kind of went, well, no, actually. I said, I'm a woman with a job, and I've been working for about 30 years because I haven't had a family, so I didn't sort of, take that route. So I don't think I'm a career woman, no. And I said, what would you have had me do instead? Stay at home on the dole and wait to get knocked up? It's just this idea that somehow, every woman with a job is a career woman. Well, where are the career men then?
Yes.
I think it's really, I think it's one of the few acceptable insults to say to a childless woman's face.
But it's very true, actually, the whole idea of a career woman and a career man. I mean, what's a career and what's a job? And when does a job prevent you doing something that is very interesting argument,
It's a little
actually,
bit like
isn't
the
it?
crazy cat lady.
Yes.
I've had cats my whole life, but now I'm an older, single, childless woman. I'm crazy. I wonder at which point I crossed that line into insanity. And yet, if I was a mum and I'd have a cat, they would be family pets.
Well, I'm an IVF mother who's a crazy cat lady. Actually, I'll be your crazy cat lady. sorry. But it's very true. It is absolutely true that these labels are very, very unhelpful,
Yes.
aren't they?
They're shame-based as well.
Do you find that sometimes with people who are seeing you for surrogacy and things like that, that there's an added stigma of using different methods to try to help?
Yeah, you know, I've just remembered about this lovely lady who spent a lot of money buying a pregnancy pouch. So she's walking around with a sort of 3 month, 6 month, 9 month, but she didn't want anybody to know that she was going to India for surrogacy, and so and didn't want anybody to know that she was using an egg donor. Really, you know, the stigma was. But she's an Asian lady, and I think, you know, culturally there are different problems there, but yeah, I mean, I think people can be very cruel. When I first announced to my family that I was thinking about going for IVF, my sister-in-law said to me, well, do you really want to cheat nature? This is obviously not what God intended. And I dismissed the comment at the time for the stupid comment that it was. But then, you know, when my son was born with difficulties, I went through a period of blaming myself and thinking, oh God, maybe she was right. Of course, later on I dismissed the comment again, but people can be really cruel and silly with the comments that they make.
That's really true. I think we could have another whole session on the things that people say when you can't get pregnant, actually, couldn't we?
Egg donation is an important thing to discuss though, because a lot of the celebrities who get pregnant in their mid to late 40s, the reason they're able to get pregnant is because of egg donation, and there's a real stigma around that, and we see those pregnancies in the media. And although I can't be absolutely sure, statistically it's quite likely they're egg donation, but they don't talk, the celebrities don't talk about it. So it perpetuates this myth that getting pregnant naturally, you know, in your mid to late 40s is quite easy. And in a way, if we think about the language, what is egg donation? You're adopting another woman's egg. Do you know what I mean? It's could it not be seen, you know, in a kinder light?
Yeah, that's very
Less
important.
stigmatised.
I think we've got 15 minutes left, so I think we should actually have some questions, because otherwise we won't have time for any. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, you had your hand up first, lady. You have to shout, because we don't have a microphone, so you have to really shout loudly.
I hope this isn't too selfish a question. I'm 33 going on 34, and I know I want children, but I'm not ready yet. I'd like to find out, how should I prepare? I'd like to know, if I'm fertile, what can I do? I'm reading bits and bobs and asking friends. I've sort of come here for a reason. I think some of the things we're saying, I'm probably seen as a career. My career is important, but I'd love to know, what is it I should be doing? What should be doing?
I think that's a really difficult question, because I think that's one that everyone always wants to know, what should I do, what shouldn't I do? And I suspect, Effie, you would probably say not a great deal, actually, but go over to you.
I think, Judy, you had alluded to this earlier about information. So what you have is a choice, isn't it? Because now you have a choice about what to do with your life in the next few years. But choice is real only if you have all the information. So what you need to do now is gather as much information. You could actually go and see first your GP and also a fertility specialist. So how can you can assess your fertility. You know, there are ways and means to assess one's fertility, but with the caveat that it's never foolproof. Okay, but it'll give you an idea. For example, it'll begin with your history. You know, there are certain points in history. For example, if a woman has very irregular periods, it does mean that she does not ovulate regularly, and therefore will have trouble and delay conceiving, or will need some help in conceiving. So all that is information. It's just about having a discussion with a clinician. And there are tests, but again, this is with caution, because it's about how do you read those tests and not be in a panic. There are tests like anti-Mullerian hormone tests, antral follicle count, that gives you an assessment of your ovarian reserve at that time. But remember, fertility is not one thing, subfertility is not one thing. What has to happen is a perfect storm, that when you have several issues coming together, then there will be a problem of subfertility. So just because, let's say, if your AMH, let's take a hypothetical situation, your AMH is low, doesn't mean that, oh, you are now subfertile and then you have to panic. Then again, there should be more discussion, but you can have the discussion. But I would advise against going on the internet, because that is the worst thing you could do, because there's too much unregulated information out there. And remember, if you find lots of hits, so a subject, the understanding of the subject is always inversely proportional to the amount of written material you will get on the internet.
That's a very, very good point, I think, and one that we should all remember. Yes, you're there. You need to shout.
I know everyone sort of wanted to talk about their story, but I just wanted to say where I am and get the panel's views, because I'm 33, going on 34. I've spent all of my 20s trying not to get pregnant, and then last year I'm also single, I'm not in a relationship. And then last year I had a scan for a reason, and they discovered I have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is very common. What was less common is I also have a unicorn-shaped uterus with a non-communicating, I don't know any of this, rudimentary cord or whatever it was. So I said, does that going to affect my fertility? And the gynecologist said, well, quite possibly. And so if you want to have a baby, then you should think about doing that sooner rather than later. But I'm not in a position to do that. And so it put me into this crazy panic of, I'm actually not in this stage of my life, not in a relationship, but then you are almost going to experience some sort of difficulties. We don't know yet, but you know, it's more than someone else of your age and all the rest of it. And so the kind of panic was, well, do you then just drop everything and kind of have a baby with sperm donation and on your own, which is a huge kind of thing to take on, or do you just let you see what I mean? So it all became from absolutely not thinking about it and being perfectly fine, suddenly I was in this crazy world where the gynecologist was saying you kind of have to kind of think about this kind of thing.
Right.
But I it was very helpful.
Yeah, this is a bit unusual. I've never done this before, as in take a history in front of a huge audience.
I didn't mean to
No.
socially about what you do as well.
No, what I have to ask you though, because that's relevant to what I'm going to say, is seeing polycystic ovaries on scan is not uncommon, but it is polycystic ovary syndrome and therefore associated with subfertility only if it comes with other features, such as very irregular periods. So I was going to ask you, do you have irregular periods?
It's fine. But it was more about, there are medical issues there,
Yeah.
but I'm not in a position to have a baby, so it's a kind of, I think it was more kind
So-
of bridging my medical problems with the kind of lifestyle problems.
Yes. Now, with polycystic ovary syndrome is quite easily treated with ovulation induction. With regards to unicornate uterus, it does not prevent you from getting pregnant, but there are certain issues during pregnancy that makes it slightly more, to use a loose term, high risk, as in certain miscarriage rates may be higher, or especially preterm deliveries, and also what we call malpresentations, when the bottoms down, breech presentations, things like that. But it does not prevent you from getting pregnant.
So the age and the time thing shouldn't really make any more
So
difference to anyone.
there is something you'll have read about, I have had been to discussions about, is called egg freezing. Have you? I don't know if the audience has heard about egg freezing, and it's like an insurance. So men freeze their sperm. For example, one of the very common scenarios is a man is having a vasectomy done, but with just like an insurance in case something happens, and would just freeze his sperm. That's very easy to do. But for a woman, it is a bit more difficult, but not impossible. And the technology for freezing sperm and thawing sperm successfully and fertilizing, thawing the egg successfully and fertilizing the egg has also become much better now. So, but it's not to say everybody should go and freeze eggs, of course, but it's information. Because what you need is information, and you make your informed choice based on that information.
Jessica, I think you...
An emotional crisis happening in this as well. So gathering all the medical information is important, but I think it's also good to go to a counsellor just to kind of where it all goes in your mind and in your heart, just to ground it and make sense of it. Because sometimes in that place you can't see the wood from the trees, and sometimes it's good just to really talk it through and feel like you're really coming from the right place to make the next decision.
Jessica, I think you wanted to say something about egg freezing. I could see your face during that. And
I mean, I think you're amazing, and I'd love to have a consultation with you. But I want to just pick you up on one thing, which is that I think we need to be really, really wary about talking about egg freezing as an insurance policy. Because I just think that it's very dangerous for women to think that it is that, because there haven't been many babies yet born from the results of egg freezing, and egg freezing, like IVF, it's just IVF waiting to happen. And we've been talking a lot about there's only like 2/3 of IVF cycles are not successful, and that's even if you're really, really healthy. So what would really worry me, and I was on a Radio 5 Live program about egg freezing, where there was a woman who said she froze her eggs in her early 30s and they were still in the freezer. Thank God she was 45 and she was going to be using that egg soon. And it just made me terrified, because if it didn't work, what was going to happen? And so I just think we need to be careful. I don't know if other panellists agree, but I just want one piece of, I feel for you so much what you're going through, and the one piece of advice I would give is it's really following on from what Jodie said about information, but just taking that to another level. One of the things I find really hard for me now is all my journey, a decade journey, is about having my own biological child, and there are lots and lots of different ways to become a mother, and perhaps having your own biological child with someone you love is what you want to do, and you're not in that position right now. But maybe you could usefully spend this time exploring all the other ways to become a mother, so that when you are ready, you have all the information about adoption, single adoption, fostering, surrogacy, sperm donation, and so that you know how you feel about all of those, and then you're doing something really constructive now, instead of getting like that chaos in your head, going what do I do? So,
Jessica, I would absolutely agree with you about egg freezing. I really, really don't like the word insurance used when we're talking about egg freezing, because it can never be a guarantee of anything. And I think it's really important that people realise that. If you want to do it, yes, that's fine, but don't go into it thinking this means that I'm definitely going to have a baby in the future, because it absolutely doesn't. But Jodie, you wanted to say something.
I'd just like to jump in, because the one option that is not being considered, and is perhaps seen as the worst possible outcome, is that you won't become a mother. And I'd just like to say that it's not the end of the world. And perhaps if you were to... and Gateway Women runs free meetups around the UK, and we have lots of members who are in what I would call the still hopeful category. And I think meeting other women who hope to become mums, or maybe it's not going to happen, or like me have come out the other side, you begin to realise we're not a bunch of weeping weirdos, we're not the sort of leftover dregs of society, we're kind of vibrant, interesting women. And maybe once you meet your tribe, the idea, if that's what turns out for you and you don't become a mum, I'd love for you to know that it's not the end of the world.
That's a really important point, Jodie. Thank you. Has anyone else got a question? Yes, you there.
I wanted to ask you said that don't read the internet, which I completely understand, but would you endorse any particular reading?
Yes, like Infertility UK, there are certain, and this is the problem we have, don't we? That's an overload of information, and which to go to. It's so difficult to actually just pinpoint and give you a clue as to which one to go to. For example, however, I would really recommend something like Infertility UK, and websites that are linked to hospitals, or reputed centers. Yes, they will give you good information, and if you're really interested in the science of it, you go to the actual scientific websites, or the ones that will publish the material, like PubMed, for example. So those are the websites you could go to. However, again, one study does not mean this is evidence for a particular form of treatment. It has to be, again, taken in context. So yes, I'm not saying don't do any reading, but it is what I would guard against is actually going to a free-for-all sort of forum. Yeah. But there are very good support networks which I would totally endorse. For example, with support groups around certain conditions, like PCOS, for example. Verity, and they are very good, regulated, and they have very conscientious people at the helm. How do you go about? Again, I think if you go to one website or you talk to certain representatives from them, and they will be able to guide you. And I would hope that your GP should have access to that information, and they are meant to. That's what they do. They go to conferences, they get hold of more information that they can pass on to you. Because I have them, can I just say, by no way am I endorsing egg freezing, but what is your right is to know about all the options available, pros and cons. Some you will dismiss, some you will take, and it is your choice that has to be respected.
That's really important. We'll take one last question. You over there, you look so keen to ask a question that I have to let you ask one.
I'll just say I did 5 eggs. 3 is my own eggs, the last 2 with egg donation. I have a beautiful 4.5-year-old boy. There's a couple of things that you said, sorry I don't remember the name, that I found very relevant. And you said there's something about the body-mind. And I was diagnosed with unknown infertility. There was nothing wrong that I wouldn't conceive. I met my husband later in life. There's nothing to do with career. I started trying aged 38, 40 I had my first idea, 43 I had my child. There is a book that is very good, and I found it after I had my baby. It's called Inconceivable Conceptions. And there is a lot about what's going on, why my body is not working the way I want it to, when there is nothing wrong. And I think it was you saying about grief. When I was advised on going on egg donation, I went on a year review with no treatment. That was the end for me of being a biological mother. And that I don't think I would have conceived if I just kept going without that time. And there is no guarantee. There is no guarantee. Egg freezing, egg donation, 100, there is no guarantee. I think that is so important. Education is key. This culture of celebrities going on, okay, hello, in their mid-40s with their beautiful families, their beautiful babies, that's also another thing that's not reality. Because when you do, eventually, if you do have a baby, you have dark circles going down to your nipples, you'll be exhausted. It's a lie that's being sold. That is not, I think, demystifying all these myths, educating young women. That's the reality.
I think that's a really good point. Education is, I think, really key. And I think one of the things that's very difficult at the moment, and I'm sure you would all agree with this, is the fact that there's so much misinformation. And that's something that you've said about using the internet. You will read so many people telling you so many strange and wonderful things that you ought to be doing or ought not. I actually dropped a list of them once. They were quite incredible things, like walking around with acorns in your pocket. And the thing is, the mad thing is you start doing it. I'm sure we've all done it. But we've actually run out of time now because we've in fact gone over time, and I'm sure we could go on for about another 5 hours. But thank you very much everyone for coming, and thank you so much for the wonderful panel.